Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about how to start or how to call the main method. So in order for you to do any of this, right? So obviously we have created our virtual machine. In order for any of this to work, you have to have a high-level system in place in order to understand how to do it at the low level. So the way it's going to work is at the high level, I have this platform kernel folder, and this has a platform class in it. The platform class is going to represent the starting point of our execution. Now, there's a lot of things in here that are built by the compiler, and it does a lot of fancy stuff. And I've mentioned this before, and we'll go over it a little bit later. But basically, all you need to know is that we basically have this srt init function. This is going to be representing the sharp runtime initialization function. And all we're going to do is we're basically just going to call this as the main method. And this is going to be basically the starting point of every single Sharp application. So when you're building a programming language, you need to know where this function is, and you need to come up with a standardized name so that you can always call this function at runtime. So we don't really need to care much about what this function does or any of the things that it has in here. Basically, you just need to have this as its main function. So assuming we have that, and this is all going to be set up and facilitated by the compiler, once we have all the information, then we can come back to the main section and we can do what we need to do. So the first thing we're going to need to do is push the arguments to the stack. So if I can actually divide this, what is it again? Oh yes, this one. So split vertically. So if I go back to the main, if you see here, we have these arguments that we need to pass to the stack. Now this is going to be an object array. And if you guys remember, this is going to be a data structure array. So it's not going to be a class array. It's just going to be a regular generic data structure that's going to hold various different pieces of data. So this is going to hold, a few int8 arrays or char arrays of data that we can basically assign various things like, the name of the application, the version, the platform that it's running on, and the current OS like Windows or POSIX or whatever. And yeah, and then of course we'll have other arguments in here, like we also want to set up the user args. So we want to pass in the arguments for the user after we pre-process all of the arguments for the actual system to set up. So of course we also have our main thread as well, so we'll see that in a little bit. So in order for this to work, you want to create a push arguments to stack function, and you want to get the main method. Now if you remember, when we created the virtual machine, we actually did create the main thread, so that should be already there. And then we want to call push arguments to stack. So we want to access that main thread, and we want to plus the current stack pointer, which is going to be negative. So the way you guys want this stack to work is we're going to have, a stack of whatever, right? And each stack is going to have a cell, right? So I'm just going to make a simple stack here. Let's say the total stack size is 3 items. The stack pointer is going to represent basically where we're pointing at the current time of execution while we're kind of like calling functions and doing stuff on the stack. Well, when you first start, you actually want the stack pointer to be negative, which means that it's actually pointing to invalid memory. And the reason why is because the way it works is every time you push something on the stack, you plus the stack pointer first, and then you put whatever you want in that actual memory cell. So basically we just grab the object or the physical object pointer or the references object in that stack element, and then we pass in the app arguments. So these are going to be the list of arguments that we're going to pass to the actual main method when we call it. But this doesn't contain all of the arguments, so we actually have to add additional arguments. So we're going to have a minimum arg size of 5. So that means that we're going to have 5 different arguments that we're going to process before we actually set up the user arguments. So we want to set the size of the arguments equal to the minimum args plus the size of the app args, and that's going to be the total size of this args array. So once we set this up, the first thing you want to do is you want to create a string for your target. Now you want to make sure that you align this perfectly with the high level, with the low level. So you want things to be the same. So we're going to create an object array. And again, it's just going to be a simple data structure, and it's not going to be a class. It's just going to be a generic data structure. And then after you create the object, you want to permanent we don't need that. So basically what you want to do is you want to create 3 string arrays. So if you remember, when you create a string array, you need to pass in the reference to the object and then the string that you want to create. If I go back, we want to pass in various different things. So we want to pass in the name of the application, which is the app name, the version, which is the app version, the platform, which is string, that's going to be the current target that or the virtual machine target platform that we're running on. And then after that, we also want to add the operating system. So here's the OS argument. So it's either 132 or POSIX. And then I basically just create another string array passing in that value. So then after you set that up, then we want to create the thread or the main thread. So in order for this to work, we are going to have our multi-threading system done. You don't have to create this entire complex multi-threading system that I added at the high level. If you don't want to and you just want to run single-threaded, which is what I've done for years, then you don't have to do this, but I'm just showing you everything. So you want to pass it a thread object representing the main thread, and you want to set the native handle, which remember is the actual address to the physical thread at the low level. You want to set that value to 0. So I created this set field var function, which you basically set a field, you pass it the, the sharp object or the actual object of the class that it's referencing, the index, which basically represents like if the field is an array, then you'll access that field at that index. And then you also want to pass it the double value, which is going to basically set the numeric value of that field. So we basically just resolve the field and then we check to see if the field is not equal to null and it's a var field. And if the index is less than the size, then we set that value. Otherwise, we get an index out of bounds exception. This is a way to protect us from doing stupid stuff, even at the low level. So we want to set the var. So we set the native handle, and then we set a field class. So what this function does is we resolve a field again, and then we just create a new object based on whatever class that we want to pass as the class we want to create. So we set the field class to a string class because that's the name of the string, and then we access that string class. So what we do is we resolve the field, so we get the object out, and then we set our string to main, which is going to be the name of the actual thread, and then we create a string array and we resolve the field of data. So we resolve the data field inside the string class, which if we go to the actual string class, again, we have this data field here. So we resolve that data field, we pass it into the create string array function, we pass in the name of the actual thread, and every time when I call set, I free the previous buffer. So if you were wondering, like, am I just appending data? No. So once we do all of that, then we're good to go. Then we say whether or not the thread is started and what's the stack size. So we set those values as well as a var field since those are numbers, and that's it. And then finally, we just assign the parameter arguments to whatever the arguments that are going to be passed to the main. So we just create a bunch of strings and that's it, basically. So that's basically how we set up the arguments to be passed to the main function at the start of our program. So once we do all of that, let's see, so if I go back up to the top, push arguments to stack. Once we do that, then we're good to go. All we do is just call thread start. We pass it the main thread ID, which is going to be 0. And then we pass it the stack size, which is going to be the default stack size of whatever it is. So that allows the user to basically set the default stack size, and we don't control that. And then after you start the thread, so we've already gone over the start function, but we basically just pass it the ID, we do a series of checks, and then we actually start the thread based on whatever parameters that we passed in. So once we do that, then we get the main thread and we join the main thread, and then we basically say result is equal to exit value, return a result, and that's going to be the return value of the main thread. And we'll get into how I actually pull and extract that value out of the main thread later, but trust me, it works. And then finally, we just return the result. Otherwise, if we could not create the virtual machine, we just bail. I forgot to mention this in the previous episode. So we destroy the virtual machine, which frees up any memory that we may have allocated, and then we return the result. And that's basically everything, guys. So that's how we set up everything. And of course, we don't have to worry about setting the main method here because if you guys remember, we set that at the creation of the main thread. So we call this getMainMethod thread or this getMainMethod function, which just returns the address to the function based on the entry method that we passed here, which is going to represent the srt init function as the start of our program. And this basically bridges the gap between the low level and the high level. So that's kind of how all that works. And then of course that represents the pointer to the main method. that gets set here, and then everything will just work perfectly. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. As usual, if you have any questions, definitely put them in the comment section below. The next episode, we're going to be actually talking about how to set up a thread and prepare it to start actually executing code. So this was kind of like the requirements in order to actually make all that stuff work. So this is the stuff we have to do first. And yeah, so that's going to be a fun video. And of course, if you guys would love to help support the channel, you can always head over to the GitHub repository at andrewdevcd/sharp. And when you do, definitely watch, start, and fork this repository. That gives this language a lot more visibility and let other developers know this language exists. And of course, also, if you guys are curious about new things that I'm looking to add in the future, you can always head over to the roadmap section. This kind of gives you a nice layout of what I'm doing in real time in order to improve the language, bug fixes, so on and so forth. So that's going to be it for today, guys. As usual, if you're new to the channel, definitely consider subscribing. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.